It's easy for our drawing to get into a bit of a rut. We tend to draw the same sorts of things, the same sorts of ways, for the same sorts of reasons over and over again. And that's fine if we're happy with the results. But if we're thinking it's a while since we saw any real improvement in our drawing, then perhaps it's time we shake up our routines a little. These 20 ideas are designed to do just that, to inject something new into our routine and practice when we draw. Because doing this can introduce new energy, new insights, new opportunities, new techniques into our drawing and be the spark that generates just that improvement we're after. The first way I want to suggest we can shake up our drawing for improvement is to set a time limit. Putting pressure to draw faster really forces change to so much about how we draw. So put on our timer, our countdown clock, and start drawing. And if we normally draw for a shorter period of time, equally, we can force ourselves to draw for a longer period, because that can also bring out new possibilities in our artwork. This next point flows on from the last one, and that's to change our time limit. And I don't just mean change from an hour to half an hour, but be creative. Try 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 45 minutes. Try 2 hours if all of our drawings have only ever been half an hour. And remember, there's no point changing our time limit if we don't discipline ourselves to complete our drawing within that time limit, because it's that time pressure that will force us to be creatively different in the way we think, make our marks, and structure our drawing time. This point is we should have a set time where we draw, regardless of how we feel. If we draw when we feel like it, then we bring a certain attitude, a certain mindset to that drawing session. But if we sit down to draw regardless of how we feel, because it's time to draw and we want to improve in our drawing, then we bring a different set of attitudes to that session. And from those different attitudes, from those different ways of thinking, we can actually spark different creative processes. Plus, we simply get more drawing time in most cases. So having a set time where we draw regardless of how we feel is a really important part, I think, of being an artist, as well as of improving our drawing. With this point, we're still on time, and that's to draw more regularly, more frequently, and probably to accommodate this for shorter periods. Think of having to practice the piano every day. From a learning point of view, there is more benefit to be had in most learning activities if we do some every day. See if we can't accommodate a 10-minute, 15-minute, or a 5-minute drawing session every day, doing something. It's easy when we draw to end up drawing the same sorts of subjects over and over again, because, well, we draw the things that take our interest. But it can be very helpful in our drawing improvement to push ourselves to draw different subjects some of the time to what we would normally draw, as a way of forcing ourselves to think in new ways, to discover new drawing problems that we need to solve, to create new creative demands on us. It doesn't matter what we end up drawing. And when we've stirred up our drawing skills in new directions, we find we've actually got something new to take back to our old favourites when we go to draw them. And continuing our theme of changing things up from our normal drawing routine and pattern and habits is, if I normally draw from photo references, I should try drawing from life. And we don't have to go and sit in the street to do this. We can just grab a few kitchen items, put them together, create a still life in front of us and draw it. Or a couple of flowers from the garden. It's not difficult to do, but it creates a very different drawing dynamic in many ways. This next point is very straightforward. Whatever we usually draw with, change it. And if we're drawing for shorter time periods more frequently, then we'll have a lot more drawing opportunities to experiment with different materials. Because again, different materials have different opportunities and different limitations. And so they develop our creative thinking to how we can use materials to put marks on paper in a wider way than we would get just using any one. This next point is, if I don't usually draw with colour, it can help stimulate new thinking and new drawing and new understandings to introduce some colour into my drawings. And it may be as simple as drawing with tones of grey or tones of brown. If I draw with pencil, it's much easier to introduce coloured pencils into my drawings. Just a couple of colours or a full Technicolor range. If I draw with charcoal, I can introduce coloured pastels into my work. And we're not doing this to become experts with a new medium, but as a way to force our thinking to shift, to engage, to think differently. This next point is just the flip side. If we already draw with colour, then explore drawing monochromatically. Explore the possibilities of drawing purely with value and the effects that we can create from that. This next way we can shake up our thinking and our routines when we draw is to go outside and draw. And I don't mean even just out into the yard, but to go into a public or at least a semi-public space, because it's the sense of unfamiliarity as well as that tension of potentially having people around us that we want to introduce into our drawing experience. And while I don't mean we should sit in front of the Sydney Opera House or for whatever your local area draws the tourist crowds is, but there's something about being outside in an unfamiliar place and having to deal with the unfamiliarity, with the sunshine, with the rain, with the mosquitoes, with people who come just a bit too close for our own comfort, hoping to get a peek of what we're drawing. This next way of drawing to shake up how we draw in order to kickstart further improvement is to do a drawing and then immediately afterwards do it again. Our first drawing isn't a warm-up, it's not a thumbnail, it's not a planning sketch in any way. We do our best to draw our subject and then we draw it again. And what we get is the experience on drawing with our first lot of drawing observation and line work. We get to, if you like, use what we went through here as experience training for what we then draw here. By doubling up on trying to see the same things and find the same solutions so closely together, we can consolidate some of those skills more rapidly. This one is going to horrify some of you, and if it does, then you really need to do it, and that's to ban erasers from your drawing sessions. Now, how we might use and how often we might use erasers in our drawing can vary greatly from person to person. But can I challenge, if you use an eraser at all, that you have at least some of these drawing sessions, particularly if you're doing some of these shorter drawing sessions, that you have them with absolutely no use of the eraser at any stage, not even at the end. Let every line become part of the drawing process and of the drawing product at the end. This next method for drawing is we can have sessions where we're not trying to finish up with a drawing at all. We're just, if you like, playing around with some of the sorts of things, the themes, the patterns, the textures, the architectural structures that we draw, where we're just playing around and exploring possibilities with them, where we're not expecting to have a drawing at the end, but we're just seeing how does it look if I draw a different way. We don't have the pressure of any time, and we can take risks with how we experiment with creating certain effects because we're not drawing something that we're then going to be afraid of spoiling. We can just play around in a way that we're not free to. This next suggestion for stirring up our drawing improvement is to do some skills exercise sessions. It's easy to think they're not particularly helpful or important because we don't usually see improvement quickly from them. But again, in terms of the learning process, consistent working at whatever skills are helpful for the way we draw and the things we draw is a really invaluable part of, over time, investing in our improvement and seeing that improvement further on. I'm talking about practicing drawing straight lines, freehand. I'm talking about drawing parallel straight lines, freehand. I'm talking about drawing lines that stop and start at the same point, or lines that go confidently to a certain point and then stop. Talking about lines that join at right angles or at any angle that we need for our drawing. I'm talking about hatching lines and different patterns, different ways of overlaying hatching lines to create different tonal and other effects. I'm talking about drawing curves, whether they're circles or half circles or quarter circles, or whether they're ellipses or other forms of ovals, or just more free form curved lines. Whatever sorts of lines I find I use in my subject matter and my drawing technique and media, I can usefully practice them. And these skills exercises are particularly good when we only have 5 or 10 minutes. 5 or 10 minutes a day, most days a week, practicing these lines can have a huge impact when we go to draw the subjects where we invest in our mind more effort, more thought, more creativity. This exercise, again, might feel a bit scary if you don't already do it at all, but that I think makes it even more important to try, and that's to draw directly within. No pencil outline, no pencil guidelines, no pencil that we erase at the end, but every line drawn directly with ink on our paper so that it can't be removed at the end. We learn to embrace the journey of the drawing, and that includes all the little meanderings that are slightly off track. This helps us to confront fears of mistakes and to overemphasize the impact they're going to have. It's a great exercise to do if we don't do it already. And the more you feel right now you don't want to do it, probably the more important it is that you do it. This next one is another easy one, and that's change the size of our drawings. If I normally draw large, go small. If I normally draw small, go large. If I'm normally in the middle, go either way. Normally draw square, draw rectangular. If I normally do portrait orientation, then let's draw landscape orientation. However I usually draw, change the size, change the scale, change the shape, because this will not just introduce new possibilities, but in some ways it will force new possibilities onto me. When I draw a very small drawing, then there are demands on my line work and on my thought processes before I can put that line work on paper that are very different to if I'm drawing something, say, 10 centimeters square. And again, it's very different again with both the materials I use and the ways I use them if I'm doing something that's, say, 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters square. It's not just that there are more or less lines, they become different lines that are thought about, planned, decided and placed on the paper in different ways with different movements. So if I want to stir up the way I do things, forcing myself to do things differently by drawing on a very different scale to the one I usually use is a really helpful way to go. It's important that we learn to hold our drawing implements differently. For most of us, as we draw, we're holding our pen relatively close down to the nib end for control. But it can be very helpful to force ourselves to do some drawings where we hold the pen even halfway down the barrel and we do very loose lines where we're forced to use much more of our arm in creating the lines, because we create very different lines with different possibilities, different effects, different impacts. So drawings where we force ourselves to hold our pen differently can be a great way of forcing ourselves, if you like, to learn more options and to discover more possibilities using the drawing instruments we already use. And this next idea is to create drawings without using line, only using tone. And so we might need to buy 3 or maybe 5 markers, all of the one color, so that we've got a couple of dark values, a couple of light values, and a more in-between value. And to actually block in our form and our whatever visual impact we're trying to create using value alone. This will force us certainly to consider negative space, possibly more than we normally do when we use line, and particularly if we think we might be over-dependent in an unhelpful way on outlining things. Forbidding ourselves to use line at all can be a really good way to force us to start to develop the ability to observe our subject and our values the way we need to observe them, to be able to trust ourselves to, if you like, create our image using those values rather than somehow having to put an outline around everything, which can create a very harsh and unnatural effect. And another way we can stimulate our creativity is to have drawing sessions where we don't actually draw, but where we Google the work of other artists and we look to see what other people have done in whatever genre of drawing, using whatever media we like to use, with whatever subjects overlap with ours, and just see some of the possibilities of drawing that we could think about adapting into our drawing. I'm not talking about copying their drawings, but being inspired to have new directions that we can explore that perhaps we would never have come up with ourselves, but which, having seen them in other people's work, triggers the possibility of developing a fruitful application in our own drawing. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Of course, no one has to do all of these things unless we really think they're going to be helpful. But to create some changes somehow in the way we draw, in the things we draw, when we draw, can be really helpful in stimulating different parts of our creative thinking and strategizing and the techniques that we use, that even if we go back to what ends up being our preferred way of drawing, there's a fresh energy, there's a fresh way of mark making, there's a fresh way of planning, of thinking, there's new observation skills. There are all these new things that we've developed by, for a time at least, forcing ourselves out of our comfort zone and pushing our ability to think creatively further in different directions that now we can bring back to our preferred way of drawing. I hope some of these are ones that you can have a go with. But hey, look, however you draw, whatever you draw, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.